What's the worst thing that's ever happened to you?
Losing
15 classic country music divas who slept with everyone. The spotlight can be warm, but for country music's most iconic women, it also magnifies whatever happens when the microphones go quiet. This is a fast ride through 15 towering voices and the relationships that shape them, messy, brave, human, and how love, loss, and second chances fueled the songs we still hum today. We're keeping it respectful and rooted in public record, yet we won't shy away from the turns that made these stories unforgettable. If you think you already know these lives, lean in. The through line isn't scandal, it's endurance. The stubborn belief that love is worth rewriting and that the truest choruses are forged in the middle of complicated lives. Tammy Wynette belongs at the front because every road trip through Nashville history eventually passes her exit. Her voice sold sorrow like a confession, and her personal life traced that same jagged line. 5 marriages before her story ended. She wed young to Upal Bird, chasing big dreams on a tight budget while raising children and studying to be a beautician to keep the lights on. A brief, stormy union with songwriter Don Chappell collapsed as her career rose. Then came the high-voltage pairing with George Jones, 2 legends whose duets were lightning in a bottle and whose private storms were just as fierce. After a famously short detour with businessman Michael Tomlin, she married songwriter-manager George Ritchie, closing the circle with a partnership that kept the work moving even when the road got rough. Listen to her sing about standing by your man, and you hear the tension she lived with: loyalty, heartbreak, and the grit it takes to try again. Lorrie Morgan picked up the torch for fearless transparency. A Grand Ole Opry favorite with a diamond-edged voice, she lived a love life that unfolded in chapters rather than footnotes. She married musician Ron Gaddis first, then built a home and a legacy with fellow star Keith Whitley before losing him to tragedy that would have silenced a lesser soul. She kept showing up anyway, recording, touring, and raising a family while grief turned into a long echo. In the years that followed, she tried again with Brad Thompson, collaborated and married with John Randall, sparred and reconciled, and finally divorced with Sammy Kershaw, and then found quieter steadiness with entrepreneur Randy White. The pattern isn't chaos, it's courage, the willingness to walk back into the light even when yesterday's shadow is long. When Lorrie sings about lessons learned, you hear the lived-in truth of someone who paid retail for every lyric. Tanya Tucker never needed a marriage license to make headlines. From breakout teen prodigy to 2-time Grammy winner, she has always moved like a firework. Beautiful, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. Her romances mirrored that spark: electric, public, sometimes messy, often magnetic. The high-profile relationship with Glenn Campbell burned hot in the 80s, a pairing that produced music and tabloid noise in equal amounts. Later, longer connections brought children and seasons of stability, including her years linked with Ben Reed and her on-again, off-again engagement to Jerry Layseter. What you remember about Tanya isn't a ledger, it's a philosophy. She prized freedom over ceremony, chemistry over convention, and career over everyone's expectations. That's why, when she sings about hitting the highway, you believe it. Because she never waited for permission to live the way her songs sound. June Carter Cash enters the story with lineage and grit. She grew up inside the first family of country harmony and carved a career on her own terms with humor, songwriting, and an auto harp that could hush a crowd. Before the chapter that joined her to Johnny Cash, June had already lived through marriages to Carl Smith and to Edwin "Rip" Nix while raising a daughter on the road. With Johnny, the partnership became alchemy, co-writing, coaxing each other toward better days, and holding on through the turbulence that attends legends. June was never anyone's shadow. She could command a stage without saying a word, then turn and write something as searing as Ring of Fire. Her love story isn't a fairy tale, it's a testimony to loyalty and craft, proof that 2 artists can pull each other toward the light. Dottie West carried glamour like a torch and paid for it in miles. Her voice could sparkle like rhinestones under a spotlight, but life off stage had rough edges. 3 marriages, to steel guitarist Bill West, to drummer Byron Metcalf, and to engineer Al Winters. sketched the outline of a woman who kept betting on new starts, even when the last one left bruises you couldn't see. Reinvention was her specialty. From earnest songwriter to shimmering duet partner, Dottie kept finding the angle that made her shine. Offstage, she navigated the same tight turns a lot of us do. Trust, risk, and the hope that this time would be the one that lasted. Her records glint with that mixture of polish and peril, the sound of someone who refused to let yesterday steal tomorrow's spotlight. Wynonna Judd grew up in the public eye, first as the powerhouse half of the Judds, and then as a solo force who can bend a microphone stand to her will. Her marriages came with triumphs and shocks, first to Arch Kelly III during a period of massive career lift, later a brief and painful chapter with D.R. Roach, and then a marriage to Scott "Cactus" Moser that proved its steel after a life-altering motorcycle accident. Through every upheaval, Wynonna kept choosing resilience. She stood next to a partner through rehab and recovery, raised kids, toured relentlessly, and kept carving out songs that sounded like survival. If you want to understand why her voice feels like a rescue flare at midnight, look at the way she keeps walking back on stage, no matter what the last headline said. Rosanne Cash learned early that making art out of life is a family tradition, but she wrote her own chapters with a pen no one else could hold. Marriage to Rodney Crowell helped define an era of literate, sophisticated country. Divorce rewired everything. Then came a second chance that turned into a long-running creative partnership with producer-guitarist John Leventhal. You can hear the arc from heartbreak to hard-won peace in her records, the way a lyric stops being a scar and becomes a map to somewhere better. Rosanne's story isn't loud, it's steady, a quiet thunder you feel in your chest after the chorus fades. Reba McEntire doesn't just headline arenas, she owns eras. 2 marriages framed a career that kept expanding: records, tours, television, Broadway, even books. Her first life with champion steer wrestler Charlie Battles grounded her in grit and taught her the logistics of showing up when the day job is actually 5 jobs at once. Later, with manager Narvel Blackstock, Reba built an empire, raised a blended family, and turned brand into a word that fit her like a custom stage jacket. When that chapter closed, she did what she always does. Rebuilt, reconnecting with joy, friendship, and the thrill of new work. If there's a secret to her longevity, it's this: she sings in the key of perseverance, and the world keeps harmonizing with her. Shania Twain rewrote the rulebook on crossover stardom, then rewrote her own story when her first marriage cracked open. The spiral that followed, voice troubles, heartbreak, retreat, could have ended any career. Instead, she found a steadier road with Frédéric Thiebaud, someone who understood betrayal not as rumor, but as lived experience. What looked like collapse became reinvention. A voice recovered, a stage reclaimed, and a life rebuilt around steadiness instead of static. The hook is simple and devastating. You can lose almost everything and still come back singing like the future is yours. Trisha Yearwood moved through 3 marriages with the same combination of warmth and precision that shapes her singing. A youthful first union to Chris Latham gave way to a second marriage to Robert Reynolds during the whirlwind of 90s country when stadiums were full and schedules merciless. Finally came the partnership with Garth Brooks that grew out of years of friendship, tour buses, and shared punchlines. She's candid about the work it takes to keep a bond durable, calendars negotiated, careers juggled, and dinners cooked between sound checks. Listen to her harmonize and you can hear a philosophy: support, steadiness, and joy in sharing the melody. Emmylou Harris sounds like open sky. She also built a private life that mirrors the restless elegance of her records. Marriages to Tom Slocum, to producer Brian Ahern, and to songwriter Paul Kennerly. Long tours, collaborations that turned into commitments and then softened into respect. Emmylou's grace isn't the fragile kind. It's the version you get after detours and forgiveness. That's why her heartbreak songs land so softly and so hard at the same time. She doesn't dramatize the wound, she traces the outline and lets the listener fill in the color from their own life. Patsy Cline was a comet, Before the plane crash that froze her at 30, she'd been married first to Gerald Cline and then to Charlie Dick, and she carried herself with the swagger of someone who knew exactly how good she was. Her partnerships weren't storybook simple. They rarely are when one person in the couple is destined to be capital P Patsy Cline, but the fire in her voice came from living at full tilt. You can still feel it, the bravado, the control, the hint of vulnerability she allowed when the booth light flipped red. She left behind not just hits, but a template for modern country singers who refuse to separate the art from the life that feeds it. Skeeter Davis danced through the pop country border zone and lived 3 very different marriages. The first was a youthful try. The second, to radio personality Ralph Emery, became a high-profile union that crumbled under distance and suspicion. The third, to NRBQ bassist Joey Spampinato, felt like opening a window. She faced a long illness with Steele and kept recording through the scares. When you hear The End of the World, you might think it's just a breakup song. Then you learn how many endings she survived, and it turns into a hymn for people who refuse to give up. Faith Hill and Tim McGraw turned a tour bus spark into one of country's most enduring partnerships, but Faith had already lived a full chapter before that with a first marriage that didn't stick. With Tim, the love story became collaborative and public. Albums, tours, acting, and raising 3 daughters while balancing fame with a regular house kind of love. They've spoken about the tough parts too, including the offstage choices that kept their family intact through pressures most couples never meet. The takeaway isn't that celebrity makes things easier, it's that showing up day after day outlasts any headline. Watch them on stage and you see a duet built on daily decisions to choose the same team. Connie Smith wraps this list like a benediction. 4 marriages, 1 timeless voice, and a modern love story that finally matched the song in her heart. She married young, weathered a short union that taught hard lessons, built a long middle chapter as a working mom with Marshall Haynes, and years later married Marty Stewart, the kid who once saw her on stage and told his mother he'd marry her someday. There's a sweetness in that arc, the long orbit that finally became a home. Connie's path wasn't straight, but it was honest, and honest roads lead to the good kind of destination. Not fireworks, not gossip, just a hand you want to hold when the lights go down. Step back and trace the thread that keeps an audience leaning forward. None of these lives is a cartoon of chaos or a tally sheet of rings. Each one shows a pattern you can feel in your own bones. Love is iterative. You try, you learn, you try again. Sometimes you circle back to someone who knew you at 20. Sometimes you meet the right person after you've already sworn off the search. Music became the way these women turned experience into light. Their biggest records read like diary entries you're allowed to sing along to, and the permission they give is simple. You can tell the truth without apologizing for the detours that got you here. When viewers ask for juicy, what they really want is the jolt of recognition. Tammy's whirlwind wedding is dramatic, sure, but the deeper hook is the image of a mother counting dollars and chasing a dream while her heart keeps changing its mind. Lorrie's string of vows is a plot line, but the cliffhanger is the courage to keep opening the door when the last goodbye still echoes. Tanya's decision to prize freedom over expectation is a plot twist that never stops twisting. June's commitment to creativity and loyalty turns into a lesson about steady fire rather than fireworks. Dottie's glamour sits next to a reminder that reinvention costs real energy. Wynonna's return to the stage after pain explains why her ballads feel like rescue missions. Rosanne's second act proves that craft can be a lifeline. Reba's rebuild shows that stoicism and joy can share a stage. Shania's reinvention says you can make a comeback even when your voice tries to leave you behind. Trisha's home team marriage frames everyday tenderness as a headline worth reading. Emmylou's calm tells you that peace is a skill. Patsy's flame reminds you that brilliance can be brief and still change the weather. Skeeter's survival gives a chorus to anyone who's been told to quit. Faith's duet with Tim argues that romance is a daily practice. And Connie's late-blooming joy says it's never too late to rhyme the life you live with the song you sing. To keep you watching, every story needs momentum. Tammy's momentum is the question, what could possibly follow that? Lorrie's is, how many times can a heart reboot and still beat in time? Tanya's is, what does freedom cost when you refuse to shrink? June's is, how do you hold a marriage steady on a moving tour bus? Dottie's is, where does the glitter go when the spotlight turns? Wynonna's is, what does bravery sound like in a quiet room? Rosanne's is, what if love is a craft you relearn? Reba's is, how does a superstar rebuild without breaking? Shania's is, how do you sing through a throat that went silent? Trisha's is, what does partnership look like between equals? Emmylou's is, how do you stay soft without getting small? Patsy's is, how bright can a life burn in 30 years? Skeeter's is, what if the end of the world isn't? Faith's is, how do you keep romance ordinary and epic at once? Connie's is, what if patience is the boldest move of all? Here's the part that matters for creators: tension without cruelty. You don't need to invent villains to keep viewers glued. The industry pressures, the travel, the microscope of fame, the compromises and comebacks, those are real stakes. When a tour bus becomes a moving house and family is phone calls from hotel hallways, no wonder relationships bend. When a producer's midnight call decides tomorrow's flights, the romantic calculus gets tricky. When the public decides it owns a piece of your heart, privacy becomes a negotiation. Tell the truth, leave room for grace, and pace the story so each turn reveals something new. So what do these legends teach? First, love lives aren't a scoreboard. 5 marriages can signal failure if you crave simplicity, or they can signal relentless optimism if you respect second chances. Second, creative women aren't reducible to their romances. They make legendary work while navigating everything the rest of us navigate, just under hotter lights. Third, clarity arrives gradually. Emmylou's calm, Connie's late-blooming joy, Trisha's home team marriage, Faith's long partnership, and Rosanne's equilibrium all took time. If the story is honest, the takeaway is generous. You're allowed to start over without apologizing for the starts that came before. Before we close, imagine the connective tissue between these lives as a handful of small, ordinary scenes that outshine the fireworks. A ring left on a hotel nightstand because the flight board's at dawn. A lyric scribbled on a receipt while a toddler naps 2 feet away. A note tucked in a guitar case after a fight that ended with laughter instead of slammed doors. A hand squeezed backstage, not for luck, but for solidarity. These are the beats that never make the tabloid cover yet define everything. They remind us that the headline is just the marquee. The real show is in the tiny choices that add up to a life. When you watch these women, you're watching professionals who kept stepping forward through fatigue and fear, women who learned to be both tough and tender at once, and whose best choruses feel like friendly advice whispered over coffee. That is why their stories travel so well across decades, because behind the glitter there is a method, and behind the myth there is a person who kept choosing. Simple moments make legends feel close, almost ordinary today. If you came for scandal, you'll still get speed because truth moves fast. We race through years in minutes, cut from a courthouse to a tour bus to a studio, then back to a front porch where someone holds a coffee and decides whether to stay. The narrative never loops, and every turn introduces something new. Maybe it's a wedding that didn't fix the problem. Maybe it's a duet that saved a bad year. Maybe it's a child who rewired the priorities. Maybe it's a quiet divorce that turns out to be the beginning of a better chapter. String the moments together and you get flow without filler, momentum without meanness. By the time the last chorus fades, you haven't just watched 15 biographies, you've watched a single, sprawling anthem about endurance, and that's the real payoff. When the credits roll, you're not left with a list of X's. You're left with a wider definition of success. It's not the wedding photo. It's the life that happens after. It's not the breakup headline, it's the song that earns its tears. It's not the gossip, it's the grip on the mic when someone chooses to sing anyway. If country music is truth set to a beat, these women are the metronome. They kept time, they changed tempo, and they proved there's no shame in starting over. Hold on to that as we wrap. The legends aren't perfect. They're proof. Proof that grown-up love is complicated and still worth the effort, that endings can be beginnings that haven't learned their names yet, and that art can carry you across rough water and set you down on a friendlier shore. So if you're writing your life in pencil, take a page from theirs. Edit boldly, sing loudly, forgive quickly, fall in love again even if it's just with tomorrow. When the chorus comes back around, meet it head-on with the same energy these 15 divas brought to every stage. Eyes forward, heart open, no apology for living out loud.